we have a fantastic fireside chat guest here with us. So I'm honored to present Saul Klein, who is a serial entrepreneur, operator, and investor with over 25 years of experience building and exiting companies in the US, Israel, and Europe. So he has been a truly globe-spanning experience, and he has a passion for working with seed and early-stage businesses and the positive impact that technology can make on society. He's a founding partner at Local Global and Latitude Ventures, and previously he was a general partner at Index Ventures from 2007 until 2015. And he was also in the original executive team at Skype, which has pioneered a lot of the stuff which in Zoom we wouldn't be able to do it without his and his team's innovations. And he was chief privacy officer at Microsoft, having exited Firefly to them, and many, many more accomplishments along a really exciting career. And with that, I'm very honored to welcome Saul to Texavania.
Thank you.
All right, so let's jump right into our talk. So I hope we can find good advices for young people. So as we have a lot of the audience, so while we're a global event with like people from 65 countries joining, a lot of the audience is still from Eastern Europe. So I want to jump right to the heart of it. Like with these COVID times, what would you advise to somebody coming out of college or considering going into college in an early stage of his career? Where does he or she have the highest chances for success in being an entrepreneur and founder? And what should that person do?
Well, look, I thank you first for being here and the opportunity to have this conversation with you guys. And I think even before COVID, we were sort of operating in what was an increasingly remote first world. And, the opportunities available to people, wherever they're based, as long as you have good internet access and you have a mindset and a set of skills, there are just so many different opportunities, starting companies, joining companies, and the number of fields that technology touches today compared to, you made me feel very old before, 25 years ago when I started in this industry is, it's a whole different world now. And I think, you can really follow your passion, whatever sector or area of interest that is. You can follow something completely new and be a real pioneer, crypto, blockchain, robotics, computational biology. I mean, the list goes on. So I think, it's just a great time to sort of be out there. And, I kind of, as excited as I am about the next 20 years, I mean, I'd love to be 20 again.
Me too. I think that was really good times when you could like work all-nighters and still be fresh the next morning. That time unfortunately has passed. But talking about this like new world that you mentioned. So in our prep talk, you mentioned also that it's extremely important to be where customers are. So what are the kind of key considerations you would share with people for like picking their location when they decide to start something?
Look, I think, it's ultimately really important to understand and have empathy with the people you're building your product or service for. Could be consumers, could be businesses. But ultimately, I think it's really important to, have not just a sort of a superficial understanding, but a kind of a deep understanding of who your customers are. And I think that's very hard to do, unless you spend real time and invest energy and effort into sort of understanding what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. And, while intellectually you can read about it, you can consume research, there's no substitute for actually, going there. So I think, you can absolutely get things going from anywhere. you can keep building, a development organization, not just from anywhere, but, distributed, obviously. And, they've been great distributed development teams for decades now, particularly, open source has been a huge, precursor to distributed development organizations. But I think, when you're selling, when you're marketing, when you're doing product marketing, when you're raising money, it's really important to sort of understand, what goes on in the heads of the people, in the places that you're going to be selling into or raising money from. So, I think ultimately it doesn't mean you have to move to one of those places, but it does mean I think you have to spend time there. So you're not just a tourist, you kind of can at least speak the language of a native, if not be a native.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, right? Like I'm based in Southeast Asia now, and having like been in the market and like doing like things in the market has really changed my perception of the market. So I can really relate to the advice that you give there. And maybe as an advice for young tech founders, right? Like, so I think what you mentioned also is that the world is very different than 25 years ago, and you're obviously have been very active in that space. What kind of organizations would you advise young tech founders to rely on to like learn and get their first investment and advice and guidance? What are some like key organizations that you would point young founders to?
Well, I mean, again, even 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the organizations I'll talk about didn't exist. And I'd say, the first wave of these organizations, certainly in the US, was, Y Combinator, YC, TechCrunch. It's impossible to believe that, once upon a time, TechCrunch was a small blog run by a couple of people in a house in Woodside in Silicon Valley. And, the resources that are available, out of TechCrunch, out of YC came Hacker News, for people to sort of understand how to start the entrepreneurial journey, have just kept on improving. One of the things, I've been lucky to have been involved in, which you didn't mention, but is actually kind of my first connection to Romania and Eastern Europe was in 2007. I started Seed Camp with Reshma, and you would know that Brainient, UberView, UiPath, others obviously came through the Seed Camp ecosystem. And one of the reasons we started Seed Camp was because we felt that while in the US, YC and TechCrunch was sort of building on an established ecosystem, in San Francisco and Boston, here in Europe, even in London and Paris and Berlin, quite frankly, they're sort of some of the major tech hubs in Europe. The ecosystems were still very, very young, very immature. Your ability to sort of access capital, mentorship, network, at that sort of super early stage was almost non-existent. So I think, obviously nowadays, there are hundreds of YC and Seed Camp like organizations out there, and YC and Seed Camp have evolved. You've got organizations like EF if you're a solo founder, or even nowadays, the evolution beyond EF, like On Deck, if you're a solo founder. So I think, the internet just keeps on developing, new and different ways for people who have that entrepreneurial mindset or spirit to get going. Obviously 2007, when we started Seed Camp, it was just at the beginning of AWS, so all of a sudden you could have cloud computing. I mean, I remember when I first was involved in a startup in Boston in the mid-90s, we raised $3 million, which was our Series A, not our pre-seed. $3 million is a pre-seed now. or it's an angel check, if you're investing out of the Greylock $500 million seed fund. But, we spent $1 out of $3 million on a Silicon Graphics Indigo web server, which was in a rack in our office. Those are free credits for the last 10, 15 years from accelerators. And, when you've used your AWS credits, you use your Google Cloud credits. When you use your Google Cloud credits, you use your Azure credits. When you use your Azure credits, you use your Heroku credits. When you use your Heroku credits, you use your Ali Cloud credits. You can shop around infrastructures, their distribution platforms, their payment infrastructures, PayPal, Stripe, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, the ability to sort of piece together a startup is sort of, it's night and day. And, where we're going, who knows? But, we haven't even seen the first wave of DAOs and what they're going to do to sort of the startup ecosystem.
Yeah. So what you're saying is really golden times for founders. Is that what you would say compared to 10 years ago?
Look, I'd say it was golden times 10 years ago. It was golden times 20 years ago. If you were in the Valley in the 60s and the 70s, it was golden times then. The difference today, I think, is that entrepreneurship is a global phenomena, not a local phenomena. The customer base, both consumers, enterprises, even governments for technology, it's sort of not even 5x or 10x. It's about 100 to 1,000x what it was. So, the opportunity set is way bigger. The set of tools and capabilities, to kind of get going at relatively low cost or no cost, have vastly increased. So, it's great. But, one thing I'm absolutely convinced of is it's only going to get better.
That's wonderful. I'd love to hook in what you said about DAOs, because obviously you're like in a prime position, both being an entrepreneur, being a VC. It seems that this is like a big possible disruption for like the VC part in the value chain. So how do you see this, and what is the role that you'd love to play in this kind of like upcoming blockchain and DAO like movement?
Look, I think, none of these things are ever binary. And, the practice of venture capital, I mean, it's certainly, there's a good book about the sort of the whaling in Boston in the 18th century, how people used to fund whaling expeditions. And the economics of those expeditions were quite similar to the economics of venture. The success rates were quite similar to the economics of venture. So I think, DAOs, the way I look at it, is just another opportunity to think about how and with whom you will finance a business and how and with whom you will build an organization. And it's just sort of another level of sort of flexibility and innovation. But I don't think it necessarily, is binary. And, with the emergence of DAOs, we're going to see the disappearance of venture. To me, the sort of the skill sets in venture are not necessarily just about capital allocation. I mean, it's definitely one of the skill sets, but it's not the only skill set.
Yeah, I agree. And there might be great opportunities for VCs actually basically get the value for what they're really like adding and like be part of like that reward system, because blockchain solutions are obviously very, very flexible. If a VC comes in early, they can get their reward and can possibly have even earlier exits, right? Like once there's like coins, they don't need 100%. To wait for an IPO anymore. So they're
But again, I think the structured liquidity has been a feature of has evolved in the venture ecosystem pretty considerably, like over the last 15 years. If you said to a founder or a VC, the word secondary, even 5 years ago, 80% of people will be like, what are you talking about? Or are you crazy? I'm going to let people have liquidity. If you're these, nowadays people are like, okay, that aligns interests. It helps people shoot for a bigger outcome. It helps, investors deploy more capital into the early stage ecosystem. So I think, I guess all I'm saying fundamentally is, it's an industry that keeps on innovating, and trying to solve the problems that we know that there are. And if the opportunity set is we now have a global talent pool that is connected through devices to one another. You have cloud computing, and you have the ability to sort of develop products for a much bigger customer base earlier and faster. You'd have to be thinking, like, asking yourself the question, otherwise you're not doing your job, like, in the next 5 to 10 years, what role will DAOs play in all of this? Now, is it going to be 100% no? Is it going to be 5%? Almost certainly. Will it be somewhere between 5 and 20%? Maybe, but e-commerce isn't even 20% of US retail yet.
Yeah, well, that is a great perspective. And I love how you point the transition to a more founder-friendly system, right? Like what you said was secondaries. I do remember the times when the mindset was founders need to be poor and hungry to have a successful startup, and how it went to, no, like founders only aim for something really big if they at least know that they're not going to be completely bankrupt if it doesn't like get to that point. So I think the kind of like the transition over the 25 years that you've experienced is a great story. But so what I'd love...
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go for it.
I was just going to say, I think it's a natural evolution of the kind of people who invest in startups. Like, if you've ever been a founder, which I've been, or an operator, you know that what drives you is not the financial return. It's solving the problem and, making something that, as Paul Graham would say, that people love. If you do that, they're going to be financial rewards. Most investors who haven't created anything, they're just sort of allocating capital, that just doesn't make sense to them. So, now that you've got a generation of investors who've been entrepreneurs, who've been operators, and who sort of understand that there's more nuance here than just, return on the dollar, I think, that those kind of solutions, if you like, are inevitable and are for the good of everyone.
Yeah, no, strongly agree with that. So let's say you'd be like 25 years younger and earlier in your career. What would like pique your interest? What would put your passion? What do you see yourself, your 25-year younger self, see creating?
I mean, they're just, like I said, I think it's like the tyranny of choice. There are just so many opportunities. But I mean, if I'm just looking outside my window at the office where we're sitting, outside of my window, I can see the Crick Institute, which is Europe's largest center for computational and synthetic biology. We haven't even begun with that. Just behind it, I can see the terrace of DeepMind. AI machine learning, like, barely begun. And, I can't see it out of my window, but I can see it on my screen. You've got Decentraland and, everything that's, what people are starting to call Web3 is going to bring to bear. So, I mean, I think those are just sort of 3 areas where you could sort of build, multi-decade careers in, and not even, explore even 5 or 10% of the opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. So our founders in the audience have a lot of areas to pick from where they're passionate about. So in closing, I would like to ask, what is like kind of like one principle or advice that you would share as a learning out of the many different experiences that you have with our audience?
I'm going to say the same sentence I would always say, and it was I'm stealing it from the first person who taught me about the Eastern European ecosystem, Esther Dyson, who was on the board of Yandex very early on. And she said, always make new mistakes. And I think that's a very good piece of advice. I try and follow it.
I love that. It's definitely much better to make new mistakes than repeat old ones. So that is a wonderful advice. And with that, Saul, I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you so much again for joining us. We do hope we can make it in person and give you the Transylvania tour that you very much deserve.
Lads, when I can bring my family, which I'm hopefully can, you won't just get me. You're gonna get more of us. So I'm looking forward to that. But I'm really happy we could do this, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. We'll make that happen with the family next year.
Okay. Bye, Philip. Bye, everyone. Thank you.